And while minutes, I think we all agree, can only capture the very tiniest part of any organization. And what I'd like to do now is introduce our panel of longtime members who will be able to perhaps put a slightly more human face on some of the memories that they have of NEMLA. So if I could ask our panel and moderator to come up now, I'll introduce them and then begin the panel. Slight rearrangement, excuse me. Our panelists. Joe Boonen has been a member of MLA since 1955 and has attended 52 of the last 54 annual meetings. He was twice elected as an MLA board member at large and served on the Publications Awards Committee, the Walter Gerbath Award Committee, twice, and as both a librarian and publisher member of the MLA-MPA Joint Committee. In 2005, MLA awarded Joe with its citation and honorary membership. Joe began his professional career as a music cataloger at New York Public Library. As he likes to comment, when I was a cataloger, Mark was no more important than Matthew, Luke, or John. For over 30 years, Joe was active both as a music publisher and a supplier of printed music materials to music libraries throughout North America. In 1962, when he worked at the firm of Alexander Broud Incorporated, he implemented the first approval plan for printed music. After 3+ decades in business, Joe decided to end his career in the tonic and took the position as head of the recorded sound and image circulating collection at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts. For the past decade, Joe has been a senior indexer for the Index of Printed Music. He was a founding member of NEMLA, as we've heard, and he considers himself its unofficial midwife. Details of this, apparently, can be found in the oral history available on NEMLA's website or person to person at the cost of a good beer. I didn't ask what you got if you bought a bad beer. Linda Solo-Blotner has degrees from the University of Michigan and Brooklyn College SUNY. She was employed at the Library of Congress Music Section in the Descriptive Cataloging Division, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology as music librarian, and at the Hart School, University of Hartford, as the head of the Allen Memorial Library. Her publications include the Boston Composers Project of the Boston Area Music Libraries as a project coordinator and editor, the editor of Notes, the quarterly journal of the Music Library Association, and indices to numerous music books, most recently Henry Cowell, A Man Made of Music. Her service to MLA includes terms on the board of directors as executive secretary and service on numerous committees and presentations. She has been awarded the American Society of Indexers H.W. Wilson Company Indexing Award for the index to Beyond Orpheus, the Music Library Association Duckles Award for the Boston Composers Project, and most recently the MLA citation in 2009. Jean Morrow is the Director of Libraries at the New England Conservatory and has been since 1986. As a lecturer in music librarianship at Simmons Graduate School of Library and Information Science from 1987 to 2008, she's shaped the careers of my career, and I'm sure many others in this room. She's the series editor for the Music Library Association's Basic Manual series from 1998 to 2011, served as the president of Fenway Libraries Online from 2009 to 2011, and would like you to know that she is an avid Boston sports fan, looking forward to cheering for the Red Sox in this year's World Series. Those of you who read our the program that we originally posted online saw that Michael Ox was originally to be part of this panel. Unfortunately, he was unable to attend the meeting today, but very graciously, Jerry Ostrov has stepped in at short notice to serve on our panel. Again, she may need no introduction to many of you, but she served as Director of Libraries at the New England Conservatory of Music and as Senior Cataloging Policy Specialist in the Policy and Standards Division of the Music Division at the Library of Congress. Her work on MLA committees has been instrumental in the Forum Genre Terms project as head of the Archives Task Force, and on too many committees for me to note. When I looked up her name in the archived newsletters, I think I got 6 pages of reports that she had submitted to the association over the years. More than that, I think many of you will remember her, not only her dedication to the profession, but to the librarians who are a part of it as well. Finally, Margaret Erickson, our moderator, is in her 14th year as the arts librarian for the Colby College Libraries in Waterville, Maine, serving as the liaison for the art, music, theater, dance, and museum programs. In 2013, as part of the library's newly formed Scholarly Resources and Services team, she assumed the role of copyright liaison. Prior to her position at Colby College, she held posts as music librarian at Tufts University and assistant music librarian at Ithaca College. She worked also as arts librarian at the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore. Margaret is the author of the monographic bibliography, Women and Music, a selective annotated bibliography on women and gender issues in music, and compiled the bibliography for the article on women in music in the New Grove Dictionary of Music, penned by Judith Tick. She was NEMLA chair from 1999 to 2000. She served on various MLA committees and recently returned from sabbatical in Ireland, where she served as a visiting researcher at the Irish Traditional Music Archive in Dublin, investigating women collectors of Irish traditional music. Thank you to all of our panelists and our moderator.
What a great panel we have here today, and I have to apologize ahead of time. I have a little bit of a sore throat. I think I overdid a little bit when I was in Dublin last week, and anyway, I'm going to give a few remarks, and then we're going to open it up to the panel, and we have a quiz, and we have all kinds of incredible information that's going to be, talked about here and discussed, and going to be very lively. Everyone here, extremely knowledgeable, experienced, and opinionated, and I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun. As we gather here today, in the shadow of the shuttered national libraries and museums, I reflect on the significance of this occasion in our professional lives. Since 1963, colleagues from the New England states representing music collections, small and large, from the highly specialized to those serving the needs of all of our citizens, have been uniting twice a year. NEMLA's original purpose remains essentially the same, and you'll see this on your quiz. To bring together for exchange of ideas and discussion all persons in the region interested in music libraries and collections, to stimulate professional activities among the members, to initiate and encourage studies aiming to improve the organization, administration, and contents of such libraries and collections, to endeavor to establish communication with libraries not affiliated with MLA, to determine how the chapter may be meaningful to the individual library. These words are found in the History of the New England Chapter, 1963 to 1988, written by a distinguished group of our colleagues on the occasion of NEMLA's 25th, and several of those people are here in our panel. It is 50 years, 100 meetings, 179 newsletters, for those of you that are newsletter editors, and many travel miles later for those of us who faithfully come to meetings from distant reaches of our region. So as we get ready to enjoy the reflections of our panel on this joyous occasion, Let us start by putting our hands together and give a mighty cheer and thank all of those who have worked many hours from 1963 to the present day as our chapter officers, newsletter and website editors, chapter archivists, committee members, and conference program participants. Their work, our work, has enabled us to sit here today at the Boston Athenaeum with the doors open, by the way. So let's give a hand for everybody. Well, we have some prepared questions, but we also have some improvised comments that are going to happen. So I think we're going to start off with Jean Morrow has a quiz, which she's passed out, but I think she's going to take it from here.
Yes, I thought we'd start this trip down memory lane with a quiz. I do want to mention that I think I attended my first chapter meeting almost 40 years ago, sometime in my late 20s. Never in my wildest dreams did I think there'd be a day when I'd be sitting in front of the chapter and be introduced as the old timer. So it happens, folks. Here we are. Let's see how you did on this quiz. So question number 1, depending on the librarian, I think probably all 3 answers might apply. I was struck by the quote in answer number C, and that came from a letter from Therese Müller to her colleagues in the area when she was trying to gather some enthusiasm about forming a group, NEMLA or whatever it was going to be. And I thought, well, you know, yes, these are still issues we're facing today, but oh, wasn't that a simpler time when we weren't worrying about changing technology year to year, month to month, day to day. In fact, probably the biggest concern we had was IBM Selectric going to update its typewriter next year. So anyway, for me, and I'm sure for most of you, just the effect of technology on our profession is what had its ups and downs, and probably the biggest change that we've all experienced. So question number 2, again, depending on who you are, I think probably all 3 answers might apply. I have to say that my first years in the profession attending NEMLA meetings, that was the biggest impression I had. I would go to these meeting-ending receptions, and the capacity of my colleagues to drink wine and sherry. I mean, they surpassed Episcopalians that I knew. So, alas, over the years, you know, as the happy hour went the way of I don't know what, you know, this has become less and less of something we could look forward to. And once in a while we get surprised with a bottle of wine or 2, but we've been much more safety conscious. But I do remember some of this. This is a bit of a trick question. Now, how many picked answer B? Okay, well, it's actually true. Now, believe it or not, in the 1968 chapter newsletter, Mary Lou Little, who was the librarian at Harvard, wrote at length about her project to catalog phonograph records on a computer. And maybe the catalogers know a little more about that. I'm thinking that must have been the seeds for the MARC record, but this 1960s. So some of our members in NEMLA were right on the cutting edge. So it was a concern almost 50 years ago. And then lastly, answer C. To me, the workshops, the outreach that we've done as a chapter for the past 50 years is probably the most important thing that we do. We continue to do it. One of the people in our chapter who was put so much time into reaching out and helping was Robert Cunningham, who's here, and I think of all those cataloging workshops he did for those institutions that didn't have the resources that the big ones had, didn't have the staff. And I'm happy to say I sense that same spirit in our organization now, that first and foremost, people want to reach out and help others in the smaller institutions. I remember Diane Oda for years organized and ran all the reference music material workshops that we took around New England. So anyway, to me, that's the part of NEMLA that's most important that hasn't changed, and I think it will make us a vital organization for the next 50 years. And then finally, the 25th anniversary, that was a gala. I don't know if we beat the attendance record or not today. I think it was 92 people. It wasn't in Puerto Rico, unfortunately. When I first started working at NEC, that's all I heard about was the MLA meeting that took place in Puerto Rico. In fact, it was several years before I went to an MLA meeting. At that time, our institution didn't have the resources to send anyone other than the library director. So for me, NEMLA, and I'm sure it is still today, that was the way I found out what was going on in the profession and made connection with people in the organization, in the profession. I think one of my lasting disappointments is the sound recording archives at the BPL. I don't even know where they are now. It seems to me that was a topic of concern for years and years and decades in NEMLA. Wonderful sound archives. I think we came so close to having it opened. I know how much work Diane Oda did on it and how much pressure NEMLA as an organization tried to apply to the politicians and the administration at BPL. It would have been such a resource for New England to have that sound archives, but that's my largest disappointment. And then finally, answer C, of course, is correct. We had a wonderful party at Wellesley College. Ross Wood, who was able to join us today, was the librarian then. But that was quite an event, and we had our own piece commissioned. It was for that glorious carillon out at Wellesley. It was a beautiful fall day, and we were all sat on the lovely campus at Wellesley and listened to this fantastic carillon recital played by Sally Sade Warner, who was actually the record librarian up at Phillips Academy. We had a formal dinner in the dining room, and we don't quite do things quite as formally anymore, but those are wonderful memories. Thank you, Ross, for organizing that one. So lastly, I just want to mention a few names that were people who were so important in the early years of our chapter. And I gave this quiz to one of my senior staff members yesterday, and she said, "Jean, I only recognize one name." So I think this is probably an introduction to most of you to who these people are. They're no longer with us physically, but those of us who knew them, their memories and spirit are still with us, very strong. Do you notice anything a little peculiar about the list of institutions that are here? Lots of public, and that's not all. I could name more. Portland, Hartford, public libraries, there were so many thriving fine arts collections, and they had specialists in those areas. If that's the saddest change in NEMLA, I think that we just don't have that membership anymore. Those collections just don't exist. Springfield City Library, the librarian there for years was Sylvia St. Amant. She served as an officer, she hosted meetings. She was one of the NEMLA folks who was very involved in the reference workshops that went around New England. I mentioned Providence Public Library. Susan Waddington was there for many years. I personally benefited from those collections when I was in high school. That's where I'd go and do my research on music and art. If I was a student now, I don't know, in Rhode Island, I don't know how I would pursue those interests there, because those collections have been dismantled. They're no longer there. Robert Loud was at the Concord Public Library. He was our self-appointed photographer. I'm sure a lot of the photos that we're going to see this morning were taken by Rob. And the Boston Public Library, still with us. And Ruth Bleecker, for many, many years, was the wonderful librarian there. Art Color of Music, Ethel Bacon was there, and I'm sure Linda can tell us a little bit about Ethel. Smith College in Amherst. So Mary Ankodovich was at Smith, and Sally Evans at Amherst. Those women were really, they were awesome. They scared me when I knew so much. But yeah, we got a glass of sherry and them at a meeting too. They loosened up just like everybody else. Wonderful people. At Boston University, many of us knew Frank Romans, and he was the real scholar, performer, musician that make our profession proud. There were so many librarians in the early years who were actually scholars first and then librarians second, but they brought a tremendous wealth, I think, to our profession. Lastly, I want to just say a few words about Mary Davidson, who, of course, is the name that everybody knows. And Mary died just about a year ago. You know, I was very fortunate because my first 10 years, my boss was Jerry Ostrow. So, and believe me, I learned everything I know about music librarianship from Jerry, but others were not so fortunate because they were kind of winging it on their own, and I think that Mary, more than anything in our chapter, will be remembered as the person who mentored so many people. And no institution was too insignificant, and Mary thought anybody who had an interest in music and libraries was important. And she always had the time and the energy to help people and work with them. So she set a wonderful model for all of us, and I think she'll be remembered forever. So thank you.
So I think we'll just go down the table here, and I have some questions that I've distributed to our speakers ahead of time. So Linda, will you tell us a little about your early recollections of NEMLA and your first meetings and any people and mentors that you would like to remember? And what do you think about now and the future? How NEMLA has changed, and how can music libraries and music librarianship remain a viable and vibrant thing in the library environment now, which is really, because of shrinking budgets, we have a hard time with special libraries being continued and promoted.
Well, Jean's summary of the history of the chapter was excellent, some of which I didn't know from the earlier days, because it was in the 1970s, I guess, that I was here for a period of about 12 years. And so this was my first chapter. I'd been in Washington for a year, but either the chapter wasn't particularly active then, and it was only 1 year, so I don't recollect that. So this has always been my chapter. But I don't really have much to add to everything that Jean said, and you had offered us some other topics. So I've been thinking about some of the other topics that are less reminiscence than just more observations. And one of the topics that Margaret had suggested had to do with whether self-directed instead of librarian-assisted research is now the norm, and principles of information literacy now perhaps dominating the approach to academic library instruction, and is this true for music? So I have been thinking about that recently, and wanted to make a few comments about my opinions and what I've observed more recently. So first of all, I think that both self-directed and librarian assistant research are both still important. I don't see how self-directed research can be the norm for students who, after all, have never been introduced to research and have neither the basic knowledge nor the primary resources or skills to find information that would help them along. While the research is ultimately, self-directed research is what, the scholars, faculty, and, professionals do. I don't think that's where students should be starting. I know it's kind of a popular concept in general about learning on your own and self-directed and finding out, but I think when you're starting and don't have a history of anything or an understanding of research process and so forth, you do need some structure. You need to at least know what it's about and where to start before you branch out on your own. I think it gives the students useful study skills and habits, especially within music, which is, I think, more complicated than some other areas, as you probably all realize. And so this connection with librarians and with instructors who can teach you about all of this and what information literacy really is, I think is important. Even though, and maybe this is part of the problem, with so much available online, it just becomes tempting to, go look online and ignore other resources that may not be online, or other procedures that, as a scholar or as, a musician who's going to spend one's life in music, you would need to really have that background. So these procedures, therefore, still apply, regardless of the formats and what you're looking at. But another part of this is thinking about how students learn what serious research is, how do they become familiar with standard resources that are not going away, how do they locate additional resources, and how do they learn to evaluate these resources in whatever format they are and wherever they might exist. And how do they learn about the subject matter itself? I mean, it's kind of tied together. And so they need to learn these critical thinking skills when they approach not only research, but, I mean, performers who may not be as focused on research but still need to find music to perform. So I also think that studying music takes place within an international community. It's I guess, like the sciences, where a lot is shared in the research that they do and so forth. And so I think the shared and national and international experiences of music is unlike most other disciplines, and is really an important factor. And this was brief, but I hope a good summary of my perspective on research in the current environment.
Does anybody else have? Do any of you have any reactions to that, or anything to add to that? I was looking.
I'd just like to second it.
Okay. So, Joe, tell us about your early recollections of NEMLA.
Well, you've all heard of the 17-year locust. This is my third NEMLA meeting. I was here at 63, as you heard from the minutes. I came back 25 years later, and here I am again. I'm making no promise, but if everything works out right, sometime when I'm 102 or so, I'll be here for your 75th. Also, the minutes reminded me that in addition to my being instrumental to the establishment of the chapter, I was also vocal. I've been thinking a lot about NEMLA the last few days, and it was never my main chapter. My main chapter was for many years Greater New York, and now it's the California chapter. Until recently, it was the Northern California chapter. In Greater New York, there's no lack of music librarians, but chapter meetings were almost non-events, because very often going to a chapter meeting meant just getting off a different subway stop, and for some of us it meant going to a different room in the same building. We tended to slough off the meetings. You go to a chapter like the Mountain Plains chapter, it's a major travel event, because you have to fly from Missoula to Albuquerque, or from Denver to Phoenix, or long distances. Even Midwest and NEMLA, two of our most active chapters, they have to plan their meetings carefully because people travel long distance. But New England had two things going for it before there was a chapter. One was, if you ignore the top half of Maine, everybody is relatively close physically. And another one is the chapter is very rich in music libraries, and as a result, music librarians, not just the big players like Yale and Brown and Harvard and MIT and Dartmouth, but some of the smaller schools like Colby and Bates and Smith and Middlebury, and the ones that I haven't mentioned because I just can't think of them. Even I sometimes lose it. But this has created, from the get-go, that wonderful dynamic synthesis that I don't think any other chapter really has. NEMLA will be, the two California chapters recently had to merge because the Northern California chapter was like New York. It was, in effect, a Bay Area music library, the other BAML, a Bay Area music librarian chapter, and we tended to slough them off. And we have had a few joint meetings through the years with Southern. We had a very successful West Coast mini conference, but it wasn't the same thing. And as I come every 25 years and light among you in the New England chapter, I'm amazed at the vitality and the ability to interrelate with each other, not just at these meetings, but for many of you on an ongoing basis. And I think this is the vitality of the chapter. It has grown for 50 years. It's been my privilege to watch it grow for 50 years. If you are gluttons for punishment, do go to the NEMLA website and look up the oral histories and read why I consider myself the midwife. I don't want to bore you with it here because I put it down for all time there. And you can turn that off easier than you can turn me off. I will say I'm very glad that Bob Cunningham is here because I don't think there's anyone else who was here at the 63 meeting. I didn't think so. As I sit in my realm of geezerdom, it's nice to know that there are people of my ilk. But one of the questions that Margaret raised was the question of ubiquitous technologies for copying, downloading, and distributing over campus networks and the internet have ramped up the climate surrounding intellectual property and copyright in our libraries. And many of us who work in music libraries have found themselves being the copyright police, or certainly the copyright advisors and the gurus. And I've observed this in recent years since I no longer have a day job and I think about these things. And I think about them not only from my standpoint as a librarian, but my standpoint of having been for more than 3 decades a publisher/distributor. And a user in recent years of CPDL, the Choral Public Domain Library, of the Petrucci Project, ISMLP, and similar resources. And I liken it to things like Naxos and Classic.com. They're wonderful resources, but we tend to, not we, the people that pull our strings, particularly the fiscal strings, tend to look upon them as substitutes and successors to a physical collection. And this is something that we all have to fight against, because when the plug is pulled, you're left with nothing. And the vagaries of the commercial marketplace and the vagaries of other things do tend to have these plugs pulled from time to time. So that we must always counsel our library users that, yes, these resources are there, use them, but wear a pair of suspenders with your belt, because if that belt breaks, you don't want your pants falling down. I could go on for hours on the subject, but I'll leave it there. And I'm glad to be here again. I love this town, I love this chapter. I love librarians.